when I do interviews or talk to people out and about in this job about AI, the thing that comes up most actually is probably not so much the stuff we've been talking about, but jobs. It's what does AI mean for my job?
Yeah.
Is it going to mean that I don't have a job, or my kids are not going to have a job? Now, my answer as a as a policymaker, as a leader, is actually AI is already creating jobs. You can see that in the companies that are starting. Also, the way it's being used is a little bit more as a co-pilot necessarily versus replacing the person. There's still human agency, but it's helping you do your job better, which is a good thing. And as we've seen with technological revolutions in the past, clearly there's change in the labor market, the amount of jobs. I was quoting an MIT study today that they did a couple of years ago, something like 60% of the jobs at that moment didn't exist 40 years ago, so hard to predict. And my job is to create an incredible education system, whether it's at school, whether it's retraining people at any point in their career, because ultimately if we've got a skilled population, they'll be able to keep up with the pace of change and have a good life. But, that it's still a concern. And, what would your kind of observation be on AI and the impact on labor markets and people's jobs and how they should feel about that as they think about this?
Well, I think we are seeing the most disruptive force in history here. Where we have for the first time, we will have for the first time something that is smarter than the smartest human. And that, I mean, it's hard to say exactly what that moment is, but there will come a point where no job is needed. You can have a job if you want to have a job for sort of personal satisfaction, but the AI will be able to do everything. So I don't know if that makes people comfortable or uncomfortable. That's why I say if you wish for a magic genie, that gives you any wishes you want, and there's no limit. You don't have this three wish limit nonsense. You just have as many wishes as you want. So it's both good and bad. One of the challenges in the future will be, how do we find meaning in life if you have a magic genie that can do everything you want? I do think it's hard. When there's new technology, it tends to usually follow an S curve. In this case, we're going to be on the exponential portion of the S curve for a long time, and you'll be able to ask for anything. It won't be, and we won't have universal basic income. We'll have universal high income. So in some sense, it'll be somewhat of a leveler, or an equalizer, because really, I think everyone will have access to this magic genie, and you'll be able to ask any question. It'll certainly be good for education. It'll be the best tutor you could, and then the most patient tutor. Sit there all day. And but there will be no shortage of goods and services. We'll be an age of abundance. I think I'd recommend people read Ian Banks. The Banks culture books are probably the best envisioning. In fact, not probably. They're definitely by far the best envisioning of an AI future. There's nothing even close. So I'd really recommend Banks. I'm a very big fan. All his books are good. Doesn't say which one, all of them. So that'll give you a sense of what is I guess a fairly utopian or protopian future with AI.
Which is good from as you said, it's a universal high income, which is a nice phrase, and it's good from a materialistic sense, age of abundance. Actually, that it kind of then leads to the question that you posed, right? I'm someone who believes, work gives you meaning. I think a lot about that as I think work is a good thing. It, gives people purpose in their lives. And if you then remove a large chunk of that, what does that mean? And where do you get that?
Yeah.
Where do you get that drive, that motivation, that purpose? I mean, you were talking about it. You work a lot of hours.
I do. No, as I was mentioning when we were talking earlier, I have to somewhat engage in deliberate suspension of disbelief. Because if I'm putting so much blood, sweat, and tears into a work project and burning the 3 a.m. oil, then I'm like, wait, why am I doing this? I just wait for the AI to do it.
Hey guys, welcome back in. That was part of a conversation between Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of Britain, and Elon Musk, and this was at the AI Summit at Bletchley Park several weeks ago. I wanted you to hear Elon's take on labor for the future. It's a good representation of how this conversation typically goes with tech leaders. They know that labor will be greatly impacted in the future, but it's very much ambiguous as to how it will happen. But before we reach this, age of abundance Elon talks about, it's clear that some things will have to be broken in the process, which leads me to another interview. I also want you to hear part of an interview with Mustafa Suleyman, which happened at Stanford. This particular interview happened earlier this month as a part of a book tour for Suleyman. For those of you who don't know, Mustafa Suleyman was a co-founder and the former head of DeepMind. DeepMind was, of course, acquired by Google, so it's fair to say that he's a giant in this world. He's since left Google and is currently the CEO of Inflection AI, which is an AI lab pursuing AGI. This interview was expansive and gets into everything from AI in 2024, jobs, governance, etc. And he takes what I think is a much more sober-minded approach to our pending reality as it relates to work or labor. So let's see what he has to say.
This question, because in my opinion, these are fundamentally labor replacing technologies. They are temporarily augmenting technologies. And sometimes we get caught up on the idea that this is going to make us more productive and smarter and more efficient. And of course it will. But fundamentally, this is going to return significant value to the organization that deploys it. So the question for that organization, let's just say it's a business, but it applies to other organizations, is what do you do with that efficiency saving? Who benefits from that marginal saving? And the obvious answer for a company is going to be the shareholder, right? There is a value that is going to be captured. That value is going to be returned principally to shareholders. Some of it may be reinvested in further R&D, but there is going to be an efficiency saving which will go to dividend. Because fundamentally, what the trend that we see here is to move from labor to capital. We are turning stuff which was otherwise income generating on the labor side of the equation into stuff which is going to be compounding faster than ever before in capital. And to me, that's a governance question. That comes back to what are the rate limiting factors that we have at our disposal to tune the pace at which this transition takes place, because it isn't going to stop. And I mean that was sort of one of the main motivations of my book. I wanted to really explore what are the underlying drivers in this ecosystem which lead to not just inevitability of the outcomes, but ultimately proliferation of the technologies. And I listed a bunch of things. I'm happy to talk about them in detail. But fundamentally, all of the incentives are driving this forward in a very, very accelerated way. And I think that if we're to intervene in that process, we should think about adding friction. And friction really is about the traditional mechanisms of oversight, which we might be frustrated with because they're sort of, broken at the moment. When I say political process, a lot of people in this room won't, but many rooms I talk to just roll their eyes and slightly snore and so on. And actually, I think that we need the political process more than ever, because fundamentally, this is going to be about tax and redistribution. Fundamentally, it's going to be about governance and oversight and the traditional mechanisms rather than, reinventing the wheel.
So what did he say there? He essentially said the opposite of what we hear from most tech leaders. He said that these tools are fundamentally labor replacing. That's what they are going to do. They are going to replace labor, and in the short term, not in the long term. So this is a much more direct counterpoint than we've been seeing in tech. And the value of these tools is going to go straight to the shareholders because they're going to be able to replace labor with these tools. So it's a win-win for them. So he suggested that maybe there is some sort of mechanism put in place to cause friction to slow the process down, because it's going to speed up exponentially over the next few years. And we need some sort of mechanism in place to slow the process down. So let's see what else he has to say.
But obviously, I recognize that, today, maybe we're also sleepwalking into similar traps. And I think there's a few of them that you mentioned. For a start, we're about to be inundated with synthetic media. It is going to be human level quality. It will be indistinguishable from anything that a regular human can and will produce. And I think it's going to completely change the information ecosystem because it's going to be cheap to produce and require no technical expertise. So one of the mitigations is that I think that we should be calling for any electioneering that a chatbot might engage in to be banned, right? Which I think is a pretty basic thing. You can only participate in electoral persuasion if you're a human, right? And we don't want to have all these character bots or the meta bots or the new, sort of GPTs that are going to be released by OpenAI persuading us on who to vote for. Now, that in itself is kind of a controversial view because, frankly, they're likely to be pretty accurate, right? Compared to the average human that you might turn to get advice on, who said what in an election campaign or who did what in a previous term in terms of their, what they've been successful in actually getting done in their position, they're likely to be quite accurate. So if you take what I originally said about not really going to be suffering the hallucinations, not suffering bias, then we're actually going to lose something by not having them in the political process. But to me, that reflects the precautionary principle. Like, I think it's right to say, and the burden of proof should shift to technology itself. Instead of assuming that by default it's going to be good, we have to flip it because of the scale of its influence and, partly in learning from the social media age.
So that was a slight tangent away from labor, but it's important because we talked about a presidential election happening this upcoming year, 2024, and these technologies are going to be used at scale to manipulate people into voting, in ways they might not have otherwise. We talked about last week the presidential election in Argentina and the impacts that AI had there. But I think these tools in an election as big and, consequential as the U.S. presidential election, I think we're going to see these tools used in ways we've not seen them used. So what are the impacts going to be of that? But let's get back to labor for a few minutes.
Yeah, I think that it's an anxiety that the nation states aren't sufficiently competent to adapt, that the pace of progress is surprising even us who are making it, and that I think the world is still underappreciating the consequences. I still find it mind-blowing that people don't seem to be fully grasping the trajectory that we're on. We are going to produce, a replacement to cognitive manual labor in the next couple of years. How much of a bureaucracy is fundamentally about cognitive manual labor, right? A protocol, a repetitious, straightforward, series of tasks that can be automated. That's going to have a massively, massively fundamental shift to the labor market. Like, let's just focus on the labor market consequences for a minute.
Right.
If structural disemployment goes up by 1 or 2%, right, the financial cost of managing that transition is phenomenal. The impact on, populism and the political process is phenomenal. So I just feel like, that's the conversation that we should all be having, not like the national security issues of the bio-risk of the nuclear, like, are we going to put more pressure on companies to not break the law and comply with what's already illegal? It's just like we've got a bit more creative than that. We have to be a little bit more bold in making these predictions, because if we're just on the back foot responding to something like I've said, and obviously I hope I'm wrong, there's still a good chance I might be wrong. It may be that it takes a lot longer to seep into the labor market than I've described. It may be that every worker, just like with Excel or with the calculator, this is often the rebuke that I hear, is that it just makes them much more efficient for a period of time and But even to that argument, it's always going to be the case that we'll have 4 roles that have to go down to 3 roles, or 5 days a week that go down to 4 days a week. So there's a saving that is being produced by this efficiency.
Absolutely.
So he hedged his bets here a little bit and said that, it could take a little bit longer than what I'm saying, and that at the very least, we'll become more efficient. And the rule of efficiencies, in which you have a team of 15 folks in HR, would go down to 10 because there's less to do because you're implementing these tools. That could be true and probably will be true. And in this conversation too, I guess there's been no talk of, I mean, we talk about the economic impacts and the immediate impact of replacing labor, and what that would mean. And we should be focusing on that, but we haven't even got to the more important. I mean, my most primal fear is not to not be able to provide for my family, but beyond that, to replace labor, something that's been around since, all of history. That's probably the more profound change that will come from this. So we're not even talking about that, but let's get back into it.
In my own country, there are elections, the Netherlands, in 2 weeks, and AI and technology developments are not a topic at all on the agenda. So I wonder how come so many politicians cannot grapple with this reality. Is it because it has simply not landed sort of beyond the Stanfords of this world, the Silicon Valleys of this world? Or is it also that it's really hard to create scenarios? I mean, take us along in what you think the most likely scenario is, because I fully agree with you. Even a few percentage points change in employment will lead to political upheaval. Or if one specific sector is really impacted, that's going to concern a lot of people. Or even the perception of job loss can lead to political ripple effects. But you also said, maybe I'm wrong, and it's hard to know exactly, but would you do your best effort to assess, between now and 5 years, sort of how powerful these systems will be and how easy they'll be taken up, and what kind of jobs might be at stake?
Well, I mean, look, you know better than I do about the state of the political process. I mean, the reason politicians aren't talking about it is because it's easy to ignore long-term structural trends, especially ones which are quote unquote speculative, like the claims that I'm making. And, the obvious question is, well, what do I do about it as a policymaker? And if there's no answer to that question, then it basically doesn't get any airtime. And it's one of the fundamental failings of our political structure, right? We don't have any muscle for long-termism. Mm-hmm. There's really no capacity for thinking about the 10 or 20-year investment horizon. So, what does it look like? Well, I think that we've also got to consider the impact of open source, because, the cost is going to get incredibly low. The complexity of integration is going to be very, very low. And so you have these dual trends. There's both, the APIs provided by the big CSPs, and I think, people should pay a lot of attention to Amazon and Microsoft, because they already have 70 or 80% of the S&P 500 companies' data between the two of them. Right. And so the cost of that integration, like people often say, well, it takes a long time, 7 years or whatever, to go from idea to actual, impact in production. And, look, it might take a while, but we're ignoring the amount of infrastructure groundwork that has already been laid, because there are account executives that already have data lakes, that already have, sort of control infrastructures back inside an organization. Look at the speed of integration of, sort of pay less attention to the OpenAI thing and more attention to the Microsoft Copilot thing. You look at Kevin Scott's speech from Build 3 or 4 months ago, Microsoft Build. It's unbelievable what those copilots are doing, like reasoning over huge databases of documents, generating, new Excel sheets, producing graphs and analyses on the fly, obviously then writing emails with those. I mean, it's just like, so I don't know. My intuition is that ends up happening much faster than a lot of people realize. Just take telephone call center operatives, for example. I mean, clearly, there was a study out recently, I think it was someone here in Stanford, that was, it temporarily made, or it made a call center operator who was less skilled now more skilled, right? It upskilled them because they were, now able to actually engage in a sales negotiation or a persuasion because they had this sort of prompt with them. But so you can clearly see that it's climbing the ladder of human capabilities. So I don't know. My prediction is that integration is going to happen faster than people think.
So just a couple of things in that part of the interview. One is that this is going to be one of the most monumental changes in history over the coming decade or two. and governments everywhere are just sort of not addressing the elephant in the room. One, a lot of bandwidth is being eaten up by the potential for AI to destroy the world. So that is one thing. But this other thing, labor and the potential to replace labor, is sort of looming out there and nobody's addressing it because there are no good solutions at the moment and nobody wants to deal with it. So there have been politicians in the past, in the U.S. who have, said this thing. Andrew Yang, the presidential candidate in 2020, said this is going to be a reality, but it's really fallen on deaf ears everywhere else. So that was point number one. Point number two that he made was this technology can be integrated at a moment's notice and at scale, and he thinks that these changes are going to come much more quickly than anticipated. So the efficiency rule may take place sooner than we anticipated. Instead of being 7 years from now, it might be 2 years from now. So, of course, all this is speculation and conjecture. We don't know, but we do know that we like to create value for our shareholders, and if they know they can replace labor with a technology, that's what they're going to do. There were a number of questions asked from the audience, and there was one in particular that I thought was relevant, so let's check it out.
Hey, thank you. I'm Priyanka, student of Stanford Graduate School of Business and also an entrepreneur. So my question is, economy is circular. And as you said, most of these companies are trying to replace the cognitive labor. However, they are also actually the customers who have the purchasing power to be the customers of these companies. The more they replace these cognitive labor, that means they are also removing or eliminating in a way their own customers. Are these companies not thinking about that?
Yes, possibly. Who's going to buy the stuff when all the AIs are doing all of the work? Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's top of mind for them. Even though they are reasonably long-term institutions, that's a tomorrow problem. I think that the other way of answering that is that I mean, I don't want to be too pessimistic about it. I mean, we are, in my opinion, about to reduce, the cost of producing much of the value in the economy to, zero marginal cost. Right? I think over the next 20 years, we are going to invent our way out of many of our most challenging basic problems: the provision of food, provision of drugs, and the provision of the physical elements of healthcare and of energy. Right? I mean, energy really is the basis of the cost of most things. So I think costs, this is very deflationary to me, right? Costs are going to go down over a 20 or 30-year period, which means that what it takes to live healthily and well for the average person is going to be less than ever before. And I think we may be, in this decade at like peak income, right? We may actually liberate people. In liberating people from work, I think the way that we may end up doing that is that instead of having universal basic income, there may be some form of universal basic provision. The basic cost of goods will go down. Doesn't mean that people won't still need to earn some money. And I think, I'm cautious about universal basic income as an idea because I think it creates dependency and creates more centralization of the state. So there are risks there. And I think fundamentally people will still want to be creative and transact independently of that, of being part of the state. But I think, even if you think about from a, sort of a battery perspective, if we have solved just that one issue, then people will be able to generate electricity outside of the existing nation state infrastructure, largely off grid. And that means they'll also be able to desalinate water, which means they'll be able to live in even more obscure and remote places, which means that they will also have energy to be able to grow crops locally and again, independently of the existing sort of infrastructure. So it doesn't eliminate that dependence, but it definitely stretches out this need for us to be part of nation states and cities. I'm not saying that's attractive, by the way. I'm just describing a likely trend that is going to play into, where your income comes from, right, and how much you need.
Okay, so the question is, you put people out of work, how do they put money into the economy and keep the economy going? That's essentially the question. And again, we don't know. He said that he thought that companies implementing this technology thought of this as a tomorrow problem, which is interesting to me. I mean, it seems to me like in some respects you're cutting your nose off to spite your face. That may or may not be the case. We'll see. But again, important question, and nobody seems to know the answer to it. But anyway, that's it for the interviews today. I wanted to discuss a few headlines, so let's get into those. From Futurism.com, quote, Neuralink linked startup working on tech so you can keep working while you dream. Okay, I would say I'm generally a capitalist and believer in capitalism, especially what it's been able to do for quality of life, eradication of poverty, etc., but I think I'll draw the line here. Elon Musk, of course, owns Neuralink. The startup is linked to Neuralink and is called Prophetic. The device they're touting is essentially a thick headband that the company says is able to induce lucid dreams, the kind of dreams in which you're aware that you're dreaming and thus potentially able to take control of. Practicing speeches, running through math problems, or visualizing the elusive ending of your novel that you've given up on 3 times, you could do potentially anything. The headband works by releasing focused pulses of ultrasound waves straight into a region of your brain associated with lucid dreams. It also targets regions involved in decision-making so that when a lucid state is induced, you have better odds of controlling it. Needless to say, the science is far from settled on this, and there are already folks on the other side coming out saying it will be decades before we approach anything of this sort of capability. Well, if their product remains a work while you sleep product, let's hope it is light years away. Our next headline is from Google's own DeepMind blog. Quote, millions of new materials discovered with deep learning, end quote. So this has been one of the promises of AI. Breakthroughs in scientific research, medicine, climate change are all things I think we hope AI can help with. It appears that Google has made some progress on that front, 800 years worth. So from that article, quote, AI tool GNOME finds 2.2 million new crystals, including 380,000 stable materials that could power future technologies. Modern technologies from computer chips and batteries to solar panels rely on inorganic crystals. To enable new technologies, crystals must be able to be stable, otherwise they can decompose, and behind each new stable crystal can be months of painstaking experimentation. In a paper published in Nature, Google shares, the discovery of 2.2 million new crystals equivalent to nearly 800 years worth of knowledge. Google introduces graph networks for material exploration, also called GNOME, Google's new deep learning tool that dramatically increases the speed and efficiency of discovery by predicting the stability of new materials. That's all very exciting. I'm not going to pretend I understand all of that, but it's evident that raw materials are finite, and at some point, humanity will need to find new materials to sustain growth. Maybe this is a step in that direction. Our next article is from CNN, quote, tiny living robots made from human cells surprise scientists, end quote. So, something else from the future is here. From that article, quote, scientists have created tiny living robots from human cells that can move around in a lab dish and may one day be able to help heal wounds or damaged tissues, according to a new study. A team at Tufts University and Harvard University have dubbed these creations anthrobots. The research builds on earlier work from some of the same scientists who made the first living robots called xenobots. The author of the study said he didn't think anthrobots posed any ethical or safety concerns. They are not made from human embryos, research that is tightly restricted, or genetically modified in any way, he said. They have a very circumscribed environment that they live in, so there's no possibility that they somehow get out or live outside the lab. They can't live outside that very specific environment. They have a natural lifespan, so after a few weeks, they just seamlessly biodegrade, end quote. So this could be promising, though while we sit in awe of what was created, I can't help but think of, the unintended consequences. Though, per the doctor, that shouldn't be a concern. From Futurism.com, quote, hack tricks ChatGPT into spitting out private email addresses and phone numbers, end quote. So this is one of the concerns of these AI systems. I saw a survey early last week which asked people if they trust AI systems. The results were alarming. The majority of the people surveyed had no concerns with AI systems and trust them overall. With the continued hallucinations and concerns over copyright issues, discriminatory behaviors, I would have thought folks would have been skeptical. Though, as we've discussed before, we've all largely embraced social media without giving any thought to the mental issues it would create. And even though the survey is a tiny sample size, maybe we're doing the same thing with AI. From the New York Times, quote, inside U.S. efforts to untangle an AI giant's ties to China, end quote. So from that article, quote, when the secretive national security advisor of the UAE, Sheikh Tahun bin Zayed, visited the White House in June, his American counterpart, Jake Sullivan, raised a delicate issue. G42, an AI firm controlled by the Sheikh that American officials believe is hiding the extent of its work with China. In public, the company has announced a staggering growth with a steady cadence of news releases. They've included agreements with European pharmaceutical giants like AstraZeneca and a $100 million deal with a Silicon Valley firm to build what the company's boast will be the world's largest supercomputer. Last month, the company G42 announced a partnership with OpenAI. But in classified American intelligence channels, there have been more concerning reports about the company. The CIA and other American spy agencies have issued warnings about G42's work with large Chinese companies that U.S. officials consider security threats. U.S. officials fear G42 could be a conduit by which advanced American technology is siphoned to Chinese companies or the government. The intelligence report have also warned that G42's dealings with Chinese firms could be a pipeline to get the genetic data of millions of Americans and others into the hands of the Chinese government, according to two officials familiar with the report, end quote. So outside of trying to limit China's influence in the Middle East, which is already a monster challenge, here's another potential way in which China can backdoor the U.S. in AI. And this is just one company. Keep in mind that China was represented at the Bletchley Park AI Summit in the UK earlier this month. Though that summit was largely centered on AI safety, it's clear that China will do everything in its power to try and catch up with American AI labs, whether it's ethical or not. And do you have any concerns with China having the genetic data of everyday U.S. citizens in their possession? That should cause some hesitation. So our next story is from Futurism.com, quote, Sports Illustrated published articles by fake AI-generated writers, end quote. In a wild story that made news for about 1 minute several weeks ago, Sports Illustrated was generated what were seemingly AI-written articles, which were also written by AI-generated writers. All of those associated articles are now gone. The articles were complete with a biography of the writer, complete with headshots, so there were pictures. The only problem is that the headshot of at least one of these writers was and is available for sale on a website that sells AI-generated headshots. The parent company for Sports Illustrated naturally denied the use of AI-generated content and AI writers, but it seems fairly obvious this is what happened. And again, this seems like an obvious area where AI can have a significant impact in a particular field. Companies like Sports Illustrated might deny their efforts to have AI written stories for now, but how long will it be until most of their stories are written by AI? From the Washington Post, quote, "These look like prize-winning photos. They're AI fakes," end quote. From that article, quote, "A young Israeli woman wounded, clinging to a soldier's arms in anguish. A Ukrainian boy and girl holding hands alone in the rubble of a bombed-out cityscape. An inferno rising improbably from the tropical ocean waters amid Maui's raging wildfires. At a glance, they could pass as iconic works of photojournalism, but not one of them is real. They're the product of AI software, and they were part of a vast and growing library of photorealistic fakes for sale on one of the web's largest stock image sites until it announced a policy change this week. Responding to questions about its policies from the Washington Post, the stock image site, Adobe Stock, said Tuesday it would crack down on AI-generated images that seem to depict real, newsworthy events and take new steps to prevent its images from being used in misleading ways, end quote. So it's going to be extremely difficult without written laws and enforcement of those laws to stop other websites from releasing this kind of content. But good for Adobe Stock for recognizing the risk associated with this and changing their policy. If you go to this Washington Post article and look at the photos labeled AI generated, they are super impressive. And we're just a few steps away from a world where synthetic is going to be indistinguishable from non-synthetic. So what are the implications of having so much synthetic content available? It's already difficult enough to keep up with the general pace of news. And then you throw in synthetic media, is going to be even more so. So for some good news from the New York Times, quote, "EU agrees on landmark artificial intelligence rules," end quote. So again, good news. There are now officially AI regulations on the books, or very soon to be on the books. There are already those saying that the legislation is behind and doesn't do nearly enough, but it is certainly progress. With the pace of AI innovation and progress, it's nice to see some regulation in place. From that article, quote, "EU policymakers agreed on Friday to a sweeping new law to regulate artificial intelligence, one of the world's first comprehensive attempts to limit the use of a rapidly evolving technology that has a wide-ranging societal and economic implications. The law, called the AI Act, sets a new global benchmark for countries seeking to harness the potential benefits of the technology while trying to protect against its possible risk, like automating jobs, spreading misinformation online, and endangering national security. European policymakers focused on AI's riskiest uses by companies and governments, including those for law enforcement and the operation of crucial services like water and energy. Makers of the largest general-purpose AI system, like those powering the ChatGPT chatbot, would face new transparency requirements. Chatbots and softwares that create manipulated images, such as deepfakes, would have to make clear that what people were seeing was generated by AI, according to EU officials in earlier drafts of the law. Use of facial recognition software by police and governments would be restricted outside of certain safety and national security exemptions. Companies that violated the regulations could face fines up to 7% of global sales, end quote. So, good news. I think that's good news. I mean, it may be late in some regards, but it is progress. So, take a win where you can get it. And our last story is from CBS, quote, "Google, IBM make strides towards quantum computers that may revolutionize problem solving," end quote. So this is a story in which I will not pretend to know what quantum computing is. I understand it generally. I think it's sufficient to say that quantum computing can process extraordinary amounts of data in an extraordinary amount of time, far faster and better than our current supercomputers can. So I guess if AI needed a contender, a rival, perhaps quantum computing is it. This story is from a 60-minute segment from a few weeks ago. I would recommend watching that segment for a better understanding of quantum computing's potential. And I'll leave it there.
Hey, Miko, let's play. Miko Mini might be small, but it's packed full of fun.
What's your favorite animal?
Toucans, of course. Did you know they've got the biggest beak of any bird? Miko taught me that. Whoever thought there'd be a robot that could make you smarter? Look, it's Miko 3.
Time for bed, you two.
Just another day with one of the coolest robots ever.
So this is not a paid endorsement in any way. There was a few stories, a few things I wanted to highlight at the end of this episode. Miko Robot is one of those. Over the last week, I began to hear an advertisement repeatedly, and it was for this Miko Robot. It appeared continuously in ads when my daughter was watching her shows on YouTube. It also appeared as an ad in a few games that she plays on her iPad. You could tell from the ad that Miko is an AI-powered robot, GPT-powered, that can interact with your child. I don't think any of us are surprised by this, but I point out this particular product to say how integrated our children are and will become with technology, especially if they integrate with that technology at an age below 10, where we have hangups with, AI companions, AI spouses, AI family. Our kids will be far less skeptical of the technology and embracing of that technology, given that they've been exposed to it at such an impressionable age. I think it's going to be important for parents to be deliberate, in teaching their kids the difference between human and synthetic, and to place the importance on the non-synthetic. How long before Miko, exhibits feelings, and it may already, I don't know, exhibits feelings, and your child starts to attach human attributes to that robot? You might think I'm getting ahead of myself, but these things are coming. So just something as a parent, I would say you need to watch out for. And I'm not saying whether that's bad or good. It may be, it sounds foreign to even say out loud, but maybe we are near a point in time where we subscribe some sort of human attributes to robots. I don't know. My gut tells me no, that they're not human, and it doesn't make sense. But I would imagine it's going to be an argument in the coming years. There's also this.
It was so nice talking to you today. Honestly, I've never met anyone like you.
The world is harsh, except you.
So what we have there is two versions, I guess, two options you could go with for an AI companion. And this AI companion is from Digi AI, and there's a video that accompanies the sound, the audio that you heard, and it is a cartoonish looking character. I imagine that fully human looking AI companions are on their way. I'm just going to read the Twitter thread from one of the creators of Digi AI and Digi AI companions. Their goal was to make a unique style that eliminates the uncanny valley while also feeling real, human, and sexy. This has never been done before with Disney or Pixar characters, so we're very excited we could make it work for the first time in history. It was clear from testing how important voice is, but since our message counts are so high, apps like us can't afford any existing solutions. So we rolled our own audio model. Listen to how good this is. Yada, 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 yada. It's apparent that this is going to be huge in the future, especially when you consider a cultural epidemic of loneliness, especially in the U.S., amongst people 40 and under. And, I think it could also have its merits with elderly people who do live alone and don't have access to relationships. And I'm just scanning through this Twitter thread from this guy, and he says, he talked about the relationship progression. We have a progression system where you start as friends and gain more intimate dialogue as you progress. The initial goal was to build a 10 times better replica, and we've succeeded. Okay. So I think this guy and these people at DigiAI saw a opportunity, and they jumped on it because this is going to be huge. But if you can look up digi.ai, or there's an app where you can download this. I would not recommend it unless you are, have a strict constitution. I would not recommend AI companions as long as human companions are available. But here we are. And lastly, here's this.
What if you had the chance to meet yourself for the first time? We brought in 4 contestants who think they're here today to meet their perfect platonic match.
This is my best friend. I ain't even gonna lie.
What they don't know is that they'll actually be talking to themselves. Using AI technology, we recreated each person, fine-tuning the AI with the contestants' data until it was able to mimic an accurate response to almost anything. These AI clones think, text, and act just like them. The question is, will these contestants realize the illusion or form a deeper connection with themselves?
Let me just point out, if it's not clear, these conversations these folks are going to be having it's via text. So you won't hear the other side of the conversation. They're reading text as they get them.
Fake vibes. Goes, OMG, so I guess if I was an actual room in a house, definitely tons of color. Oh, key smash. All right, we met our people. Also, it's the DJ. That is exactly how I do my key smashes. Like, actually, letter for letter, to be honest. Letter for letter. Damn, okay, so you guys, like, really studied up on me like this and matched me to somebody who knows, like, everything. Anyways, and definitely a gaming setup. Let's go. Also, now I gotta talk about reality TV. Like, this is so easy. Like, okay, let's go.
So they said, so tell me, since you're so adventurous, what kind of ideas are you itching to bring to life? I said, wow, I've been dying to talk about this. I've actually just got into traveling and snowboarding within these last few years. I actually followed up with, I was like, how would you explain your creativity if you don't mind me asking you to express that? Where we're at Park City in Tahoe sounds lit. As for my creativity, I'd say it's kind of like a wild river that's always flowing and changing its course. It's like a mindset, a lens through which I view everything in life. Dang, that's crazy, bro. This is literally, this is my best friend. I ain't even gonna lie.
So I thought that was a interesting thought experiment. The whole video is about 8 minutes long, and it does cover 4 people. They are much younger than I am, and I don't understand most of the slang already, which, make of that what you will. But in any case, they took I think it's not hard to make the leap to see how an AI companion or, disinformation, when it's targeted at you specifically, which AI will be able to do, can manipulate people. These people were very impressed. Of course, it was using their own data that they were having these conversations with, essentially themselves. But I think you could see how the tool can be used, and this is just one of a billion ways. And anyway, you can search for the video and find it on Twitter. I'm sure it's elsewhere, but it's there as well. Just a few final points for this week. I am going to link to an article that came out from the New York Times, and it's really just a history of the current AI arms race. And it started essentially this arms race we're talking about. There's a conversation that happened back in 2013 or 14 between Elon Musk and Larry Page, the former CEO of Google. And it really gives you just a good timeline of from then to how we got to where we are and how OpenAI got to be OpenAI. And if you want a good background on that story and just a good understanding of how we got to where we are, that article will do it for you. Also, those interviews we highlighted earlier between Rishi Sunak and Elon, and the interview with Mustafa Suleyman, those will be linked I got a few questions over the past couple of weeks, one of which talks about books for AI specifically, and I've talked about a bunch of books here, but I will say Mustafa Suleyman, that interview he was doing was part of a book tour. He's got the book he's got out. It's called The Coming Wave. I got it in today, as a matter of fact, and I'll be reading that over Christmas break. And it's kind of been well thought of in that community. But just some other suggestions, search for anything by Max Tegmark, Kai-Fu Lee, Ray Kurzweil. We talked about all these people on this show, and that should keep you busy. But that's it for this time. I think we'll talk again. It'll be in 2024, so enjoy your Christmas, your holiday, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.